I just finished a bunch of cedarwood planters, and as you can see, they all have sloped sides. I accomplished these sloped sides with what used to be a very common technique called a compound mitered butt joint. Let's get into it. Ow. First, let's get a little terminology out of the way. The technical term that describes the shapes of these planters comes from the architectural name for a truncated pyramid, that is, a pyramid with the top cut off. It's called a frustum, and that should win you a point when playing trivia. Actually, this is an upside down or reversed rectangular pyramid frustum. And this planter, the one with the one straight side, is an asymmetric reversed rectangular pyramid frustum. And that should win you the whole game. Well, I'm going to dispense with these 50-cent words and be a little less pedantic and just refer to these as tapered planters. Although I may say the word frustum from time to time just because it's fun to say. This planter, the one with the 4 tapered sides, is designed to stand alone, while this, the one with the flat side, is designed to be hung under a window or on a fence. As I said before, these tapered corners were made with a unique joint called a compound mitered butt joint. These were once very common when feeding troughs and hoppers were made from wood. The parts are both mitered and beveled so they fit together. Sounds complicated, I know, but all it takes is the ability to find a few off-square angles and knowing where to cut them. Of course, the first step in any outdoor project is to choose a suitable wood, one that resists rot and weathers well. And I've collected a few of them here. One side of each board has been left raw, while the other has been coated with a weatherproofing, so you can see how it might look with a clear finish. Here in North America, some of your better choices include these 6 woods. Western red cedar and redwood. These are the most common choices, probably because they are usually the most readily available. Atlantic white cedar. If you live by the ocean, I know from experience that this resists the effects of salt water. Cypress, which many craftsmen consider to be the best all-round outdoor wood. Black locust, which will last for decades even in ground contact. And white oak, which settlers here in Ohio sometimes used as the foundations for their log cabins. The high tannin content discourages insects. And if you want to look a little further afield, or you live a little further afield, you might also want to consider these. Acacia, grown mostly in Africa and Australia. Mahogany from South and Central America and the Caribbean, probably one of the easiest hardwoods to work. Ipe, also from South and Central America. This is one of the densest woods available, so you'll need some fortitude to work it. And teak from Southeast Asia and plantations around the world. Be aware that teak may be an expensive and controversial choice. Harvesting naturally grown teak may contribute to rainforest deforestation, and the scarcity has pushed the demand so high that a lot of what's being sold as teak isn't really teak. So, if you go this route, make sure that your purchase is certified by the Forest Stewardship Council as plantation-grown teak. Now, in addition to all these choices, you also have these 2. Treated lumber, although the chemical treatments, usually copper compound, may discourage some beneficial microbes in the soil that you put in your planter. If this is your choice, think about lining the inside of the planter with plastics. You might also choose plastic wood composites, made from wood flour, wood fibers, and thermoplastic resins. Be aware that this last choice cannot be glued except with epoxy and cyanoacrylate superglue. And it can't be stained except by your kids. It does come in a lot of colors though. To help you choose between all of these outdoor materials, we've prepared a chart that compares their properties. This is included with the plans for the planters, and it's available from the Workshop Companion General Store. Before you cut the wood or wood substitute, decide on the work slope. At what angle do you want the parts to taper when you bring them together? On this particular planter, the parts taper at 15 degrees off plumb. So the work slope that we're after is 15 degrees off plumb. or vertical, however you want to say it. In the project plan that I put together for these planters, I've included a chart for miter gauge settings and blade tilt settings for work slopes between 5 degrees and 60 degrees in 5-degree increments. It gets pretty involved because of, well, cosines and tangents and stuff. When we make the cut for these corners, the miter gauge is set to 75.5 degrees and the saw blade is tilted at 4 degrees. You see what I mean? On our website, we have posted something that puts this chart to shame. Travis has programmed an online calculator that will find the miter and bevel angles for any work slope between 0 and 90 degrees. That's any work slope, period. Want to make a frustum whose sides slope at 23.7 degrees? This calculator will figure that out. But wait, there's more. The parts don't have to slope at the same angle. You can make the front and back slope at a different angle than the sides. Let's leave the sides at 15 degrees. That's work slope A. But make the front and back slope at 30 degrees. That's work slope B. And there are the settings. And this is how it looks when you actually do it. You can't do this with any other joint. This is one of the advantages of a compound mitered butt joint. The calculator also finds the width of each piece so the planter remains at the depth that you want it to be. I've put a link to this calculator in the comments and the descriptions so you can annoy your friends and amaze your enemies. But now that we've got all the numbers, it's time to bevel some edges. We're going to make our planters out of western red cedar. Now this stuff usually comes with one side smooth and the other side rough. Now we'll need both sides smooth, so I'm going to plane this one down just a little bit. Fortunately, 1x-cedar usually comes a little thicker than normal. We were able to plane down the 1x10s we bought for this planter to a standard 3/4 of an inch, or 19 millimeters thick. But really, it doesn't matter how thick the boards are as long as they're all the same. Next, we're going to rip the boards to width and bevel them at the same time. Now remember, you only need to bevel the front, the back, and the sides of the planter. The bottom boards and the stand, if you make one, those boards are not beveled. And if you make the window planter, the back is not beveled. Only the sloped boards are beveled. And you will need to bevel the top and bottom edges at 15 degrees, the same as the work slope we're after. Rip the first bevel, removing as little stock as possible. Reset the fence if necessary so that the second bevel cut will rip the board to the necessary width. Remember, because these boards are sloped, you may need to cut them wider than the depth of the assembled planter. I also suggest that you make some beveled test strips from scraps or extra wood. These should be 3 to 4 inches, that is 75 to 100 millimeters wide, and the same thickness as the planter boards. These will help us set up for the compound miters at the corners of the planter. As I said before, we need to set the angle of both the miter gauge and the blade tilt to make these cuts. Now, there are several different ways to measure these angles accurately, and I'm going to show you 2 of them. You can go old school using a combination square with a retractor head and a sliding T-bevel. Or you can go grade school and use a digital angle finder. Which one is best? Well, that depends upon the job. And for this particular job, where accuracy counts, I'm going to use both and then check one against the other. And in order to do that, we need to know the accuracy of our measuring tools. So first, let's check the protractor head. Set the protractor to 0 and then use it to score a line in a board with a jointed edge. I'm using a pencil here so you can actually see the line. Flip the protractor over and align the ruler with the mark you just made. They should align perfectly. If they don't, reset the protractor a little to the right or a little to the left and repeat until you find the real 0 for that specific protractor. You may want to make a note on a piece of tape and stick it to the protractor so you'll always know how to adjust your settings when you use it. If you're using a digital inclinometer like this, be aware that these things will measure to 0.1 or in some cases 0.05 degrees, but they only promise an accuracy of 0.10. 2 degrees. To find out how far this sucker may be off, let's use the 45-90 head on our combination square. I know this thing is right on the money because the 90-degree face passes the score test that I just showed you. And the 45-degree face aligns with a trustworthy 45-degree triangle. And I know the triangle is trustworthy because I paid a lot of money for it. Clean your saw table so that no dust interferes with this test. Put the finder on the table and then zero it out. Place the square on the table right beside it. The finder to the 45-degree face and then to the ruler. Do this over and over again to make sure that you're getting consistent readings. Well, as you can see, our finder is 0.05 degrees off at 45 degrees and 0.1 degree off at 90. Not only does this tell me how much this finder is off, it tells me that the error is progressive. You see, some of these things are perfectly happy under 45 degrees and then get all grumpy once you go past it, or the other way around. Our finder accumulates an error of 0.0012 degrees for every 1 degree past 0. When I set the blade bevel at 4 degrees, there won't be enough of an error to show up on the display. But when I get to the miter gauge, 75.60 degrees may be closer to my mark than 75.50. Sometimes you just have to be smarter than your tools. Speaking of which, check your miter gauges. Older miter gauges, like this Delta, point to 90 degrees when the face is square to the fence. Newer miter gauges, like this Wen, which we will be using to make these cuts, point to 0. Actually, they don't point to anything at all. Instead, they have a detent that fits in a triangular slot. And they have several slots at useful degrees around the protractor. But there's nothing at 14.5 degrees, the setting you need for this project. If you rotate the detent to use it as a pointer, which is what the owner's manual tells you to do, the pointer moves sideways the better part of a degree. In this case, you not only need to be smarter than the tool, but also the engineer who designed it. So I'm going to do my initial setup with the protractor and the sliding T-bevel, then check it with the angle finder and dial it in with a series of test cuts. Sounds like a lot of work, I know, but welcome to craftsmanship. Let's start with the blade bevel. Set the protractor to 94 degrees. A magnifier is a great assist. This protractor has grown very old and the lines keep getting closer together. Then use the protractor to set the T-bevel. The light behind the rulers helps me to align them. Using the T-bevel, set the tilt of the saw blade. Once again, a light behind the T-bevel helps you see when the blade reaches the correct tilt. Reattach the angle finder to your saw blade and see if you're in the right neighborhood. And I am. At this point, you may have to make a judgment call. Do you trust the angle finder or the T-bevel? Since I'm right on the money with both, I think I'm there. Reset the protractor to 75.5 degrees. There's no half-degree mark, so you'll have to guesstimate. Then use the protractor to set the T-bevel. Place the base of the T-bevel against the fence of your table saw and align the face of the miter gauge with the ruler. To check your settings with the angle finder, first clamp the face of the miter gauge to a flat surface. Then zero out the angle finder on the face. Then hold the angle finder to the bar of the miter gauge. If we compensate for the inaccuracy of the finder, we're hoping for a reading of 75.60. And this time, I'm going to make a small adjustment. Understand that you don't have to check the T-bevel settings against the angle finder. You can use one or the other. It all depends on the equipment that you have and how you like to work. I like the double check because it catches errors and saves time. Sometimes it's the difference between 2 test cuts and 20, which is where we are now. We're going to make some test cuts in the test boards that we made earlier. Place the miter gauge in the left slot and put a board in the miter gauge with one of the beveled edges against the face. Make a cut a small distance from the right end. Tilt the board up so that it rests on its beveled edge. Flip the cut off around and butt the beveled edges together. The board should fit together with both sides sloped at the same angle and square to one another. To make sure that they are, wrap the boards around a block of wood with a square corner. Also check where the boards come together. The edge on the board should be parallel to the face of the other. If the boards are visibly out of square, or the edge and the face go off at different angles, check your setup. Either the blade tilt or the miter gauge angle is off by a degree or more. If the parts are reasonably square, and the end and the edge are parallel, then attach a stop to your miter gauge face and cut 4 parts, all exactly the same length. As you cut, flip the board edge for edge. The parts you cut should be trapezoid shaped and exactly the same length at the top and the bottom. Tape them together to form a frustrum, with all the outside ends and faces even with each other. Carefully check your corners. They should all be nice and tight like this. In fact, this was my first set of cuts, and it shows you the value of carefully checking and double checking your angles. If your assembly looks like this with visible gaps on the outside of the corners, try reducing the tilt of the blade. And if there are gaps on the inside corners like this, increase the blade tilt. Now that we're satisfied with our setup, I'm going to cut the sloped parts for the standing planter. That's the one with the 4 sloped sides. I'll cut all 4 parts from 2 boards, cutting each board into an end and a side. I've marked my cuts. There will be 3 compound miters per board. And I've made the boards just a little longer than I need, so I have room for just a few tiny mistakes. I've also put a piece of tape with a red arrow beside each mark. This shows which way to feed the part, and that tells me what edge should rest against the miter gauge. It also tells me which side of the mark to cut on, where the kerf should be. There are a lot of these compound miters to make, each with its own setup. And cedar is a fairly expensive wood. And since I am predisposed to nincompoopry, these tapes and arrows keep me from wasting wood. Start by making the cut that separates the 2 parts. The miter gauge is in the right-hand slot, and what will become the outside surface of the front or back is facing up, and the top edge is against the face. Keep the miter gauge in the right-hand slot and flip the shorter piece edge for edge. Make a cut, trimming what will become the end to its final length. Move the miter gauge to the left-hand slot. Flip the long board edge for edge and cut it to length. Then do it all over again to make 2 sides and 2 ends, and this is how they should fit together. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a true pyramid rectangular frustum. You'll be able to tell your grandchildren that you've seen one in the wild. Next, we'll make the slope parts for the window planter, the asymmetrical frustum with the 1 unsloped side. I'll make them all from a single board, and once again I've cut this board a little longer than I need just in case. On this board I've marked out 2 miters equidistant from the ends. Cut the first miter with the outside surface of what will become the front facing up and what will become the top edge against the face of the miter gauge. Move the miter gauge to the other slot. Flip the board face for face so the bottom edge is against the miter gauge face, and cut the second miter. As you have probably guessed, the cutoffs from the long board become the sides of the planter. The cutoff from the left becomes the left side, and the cutoff from the right becomes the right side, right after I trim them to length. I've readjusted the blade tilt so it's square to the table, and I'm trimming the back edges of the sides square to their top and bottom edges. I also need to miter the back to fit between the sides. But remember, this part has no slope, so it's a simple miter. And the miter is at 15 degrees, the same as the work slope. So leave the blade square to the saw table and rip the part to match the depth of the planter. Then miter the ends with the miter gauge set to 75 degrees. No bevels needed. And here's how they fit together. Before we make the rest of the parts, let's assemble the sides and the ends of both planters. Let's start with the window planter. I'm going to join all of the parts with glue and dowels to make the joinery as strong as possible. Why not glue and screws? Well, because screws tend to pull out of end grain, especially in softwoods, and the cedar is as soft as it gets. After all, this planter is going to be sitting out in a rugged environment, so the joinery has to be really tough. And I'm going to make each tough joint in 2 steps. First the glue, and then the dowels. That will make assembly a lot easier. But first, we have to clamp these suckers up. And clamping angled parts can be a real pain. So I've made myself some wedges. Each wedge is angled at 15 degrees, same as the work slope. Lay the back on the assembly table, put the sides in place, and then place a wedge against each side. Make sure the wedges and sides and back are all tight against one another, and clamp the back in place with a long, narrow scrap against the bottom edge of the back. Clamp the wedges so that they remain flat on the table, and then clamp the wedges, sides, and back together. As you work, make the clamps snug, but don't completely tighten them yet. Position the front on the sides and temporarily tape it in place. Place 2 hooked wedges over the top near the corners. The hooks are actually little nibs that keep the wedges from sliding off the top. Clamp the hooked wedges down on the top, first at the back and then at the front. One at a time, slowly tighten all the clamps. Check that all the butt joints are completely closed. What a job, huh? Every now and then, you run into an assembly procedure that requires rehearsal, or 2, or 3, or in my case, 4.5. But now it's time to do it for real. As we do this, remember that sometimes the end grain sucks up enough glue to result in a starved joint, that is, a joint without enough glue to make a strong bond. To prevent this, we're going to apply the glue twice. Apply glue to all the end grain surfaces and wait 5 to 10 minutes for them to wick up all the glue they want. Then apply the glue again and immediately clamp the parts together. If you're having problems with the top sliding, rub some sandpaper together to put a few grains of coarse abrasive in the glue on the 2 adjoining sides. And if you're worried about the glue sticking to the wedges or the other parts of your assembly jig, wax them. While we're waiting for the glue to dry on the window planter, let's clamp up the standing planter. Once again, we're going to need a table and some wedges, and in this case, some U-shaped wedges made out of plywood. Temporarily, assemble the parts using the U-shaped wedges to hold the sides to the ends. These are really just 2 15-degree wedges joined about 11 inches or 280 millimeters apart. Clamp cauls or wooden blocks to the sides, even with what will become the bottom edges. Position them so they will keep the outside faces of the ends aligned with the edges of the sides. Clamp the U-shaped wedges down, drawing them down toward the assembly table. This will squeeze the sides and the ends together at the bottom, which is currently the top, as it sits on the assembly jig. Place wedges near the top edges, currently the bottom, at all 4 corners. Clamp them so they squeeze the sides against the ends. Finally, clamp the U-shaped wedges together. The plywood will flex a little, allowing you to do this. Before you tighten all the clamps, take a wood clamp and put it between the sides. But don't use it as a clamp. Instead, make it into a spreader. You see, when you tighten all these clamps, they may cause the sides to bow inward, opening up gaps at the ends. This makeshift spreader will keep that from happening. With the clamps and spreader in place, slowly tighten the clamps one at a time. Turn one clamp a half turn, and then the next, and then the next, and so on. Use the spreader as needed to keep the sides straight and continue until all the joints are closed. And that'll do it. And now we just apply the glue as we did before and let it cure. When the glue is dried Add the dowels that we mentioned earlier to reinforce the joints. Now you can buy these ready-made or you can make your own. If you make your own, be sure to cut grooves in the sides. These grooves relieve the hydraulic pressure when you put glue on a dowel and in a hole and then attempt to drive the dowel home. The grooves also keep the glue on the dowel. Without them, the wood around the lip of the hole would simply wipe the glue off. Once the glue has cured, cut the dowels flush to the wood surface with a flush cut saw. Then remove any remaining dried glue and sand the surfaces flush. I do as much of this work as I can with hand tools to keep the sawdust to a minimum. The cedar is really nasty stuff. Many craftsmen, including me, are sensitive to it. In addition to these plain old round dowels, you can also make the dowels decorative by making what old-time carpenters called tray nails. Basically, these are just round dowels with square heads. We show how to make and install these in our video on pegged mortises and tenons. The link is in the description and the comment. The bottoms of these planters are both drainable and removable. There are spaces between the boards to let the excess water drain out when you water the plants. And you can remove them completely to make it easier to clean them between growing seasons. Or, if the bottom should rot out, you just replace it. To make the bottom for one of these planters, first make the ledgers that support it. If the ledger is to be attached to the slope front or back, rip a 15-degree bevel, or a bevel that matches the work slope, in one edge. Before you glue the ledgers in place, make sure that the beveled ledgers don't slide down the slope as you tighten the clamps. They sometimes do this. To prevent it, first put the ledger in position, then clamp 2 scraps, one each near the right and left ends of the ledger, to keep the ledgers flush with the bottom of the planter. Apply glue and spread it across the entire surface of the ledger. It's important that you get a good bond all across the surface to keep water from soaking in between the parts. After spreading the glue, rub 2 pieces of 50 grit sandpaper together over the parts to get a little grit in the glue. Position each ledger on the planter, apply the clamps, and wipe away the excess glue. The installed ledgers should be horizontal and even with each other. Measure the distance between the outside edges and then cut some narrow boards, somewhat longer than that, to span the distance between them. Lay out the bottom boards, spacing them between 1/16 and 1/8 inch apart. That's 1.5 and 3 millimeters. When laid out, the bottom should be a little longer and a little wider than necessary. Lay out the rails on the boards a little closer together than needed to fit between the ledgers. Then tack them in place. Once you're sure the rails are properly positioned, go ahead and nail them to all the boards with wire nails. If you have a nail gun, use it. Trim the bottom so that it fits the planter loosely and the rails rest between the ledgers. You don't have to bevel the boards where they fit against the sloped sides. Cover the assembled bottom with weed barrier landscape fabric. You can either tuck it around the bottom or staple it in place. This will still allow the planter to drain, but it will keep most of the dirt from washing out with the water. And by the way, if you don't want to make a fancy bottom, you could just lay a board across the bottom with some holes in it. One just happens to last a little longer than the other. And they're both easy to replace. At this point, you can paint, stain, or finish the planters if you want to. We wanted to preserve the look of the raw Western red cedar. So we made a few of these last summer, and we tested 3 different clear finishes. Our hard wax finish that we showed how to make in our video, Hard Wax Finishes Over Explained. Rudy's tung oil formula from our video, Finding the Perfect Finish. And a regular old wipe-on poly. We only applied 1 coat, and you can hardly tell that there was any finish there. But the planters are still solid, the joints are still tight, and the wood is pretty well stained. The boards have also cupped a bit. You can see the parts trying to pull apart at a few of the corners. But these are 2 dowel joints, and that's why we added a dowel at each corner. Surprisingly, the finish that seems to have done the best is our own hard wax finish. We never intended it to be used outdoors, but it's made with boiled linseed oil, which is used in many outdoor paints. Seeing these results, I definitely recommend an exterior finish. Maybe something a little less experimental than our hard wax. If you like the look of raw wood, look for a clear or transparent weatherproofing, something with UV protection. This is often used on decks to help extend their life, and it will work just as well on planters. But to get the full benefits, you should apply it once a year to both the inside and outside surfaces. Maybe apply 2 coats to the inside surfaces to help stop those boards from cupping. The last step, of course, is to hang or place the planter where the neighbors can see it and then fill it full of flowers to make them jealous. You might think you could screw it directly to the siding beneath your window or to your wooden fence. Don't do this. Instead, use washers or cut some blocks to space the planter a little ways off the side of your house or away from the wooden fence. If you don't do this, water may collect between the back of the planter and the wooden fence or your siding and cause them both to rot. You can also just hang the planter using hooks and eyes. This makes it easily removable. But notice that I've added a spacer to hold it away from the wood at the bottom. The hooks hold it away at the top. Well, what if you want to hang it from a chain link fence? Well, here are 2 possibilities. Screw metal hooks to the back of the planter to hang it from the top rail of the chain link fence. You may have to bend them a little to fit the rail tightly. You can also use cable ties to lash the planter to the chain links themselves. But you have to make sure that the links are solidly attached to the top rail. If you've made the standing planter, you may also want to make a stand to put it on. This simple stand is made from cedar, the same wood as the planter itself. As you can see, the construction is just butt joints and a few simple miters glued edge to edge or face to face. But I did have to use screws in one place, stainless steel screws to keep them from rusting and staining the wood. These stiffeners were added to keep the wide ends from splitting. And if I had used glue to hold these in place, the glue would have prevented the ends from expanding and contracting. And these parts, all of these parts, expand and contract a lot, like whenever it rains or whenever you water the plants. So I attached the stiffeners with screws only, no glue. The screws will bend slightly in the soft cedars, allowing the wood to move when it needs to. The blocks along the top of the stand make it easy to attach the stand to the planter. Just put the planter in place like so, and then shoot screws through the bottom rails and into the blocks. This makes the stand easily removable should you ever want to put the planter on something else. You'll find the plans for the tapered window planters, the tapered standing planters, and the untapered stand at the Workshop Companion General Store. There's even a picture of a frustum or 2. The links are in the comments and the description. You'll also find the links for the large and the small assembly tables, one of the most useful jigs you'll ever make. Please like, subscribe, and buy something to keep these videos coming. And, as always, thank you for your kind attention.